You are standing on a dry dock in Bristol. The iron hull curves above you like the ribcage of something that refused to die. The rust runs in long brown streaks down the plates, and where the paint has peeled, you can see the original black beneath. Still hard, still there. This ship was launched in 1843, and it has already survived more than most cities. A fire broke out in her engine room off Cape Horn, and the smoke rose into a sky with no witnesses. She ran aground on the coast of Ireland for an entire winter, her hull grinding against sand and rock for 11 months, while engineers argued about whether she was worth saving. She was. Crowds gathered on the Irish cliffs to watch her refloated, dragged free, tugged back toward the world that had not yet finished with her. She crossed the Atlantic 32 times before anyone thought to send her further. In 1852, they pointed her south, then east, then as far as the planet goes, Melbourne, Australia, the other side of everything. How does a ship made of iron and coal and human will carry 600 people across 14,000 miles of open ocean and arrive? You're about to find out. Step aboard. Liverpool, August 1852. The Mersey smells of rope tar and river mud and something underneath both, the salt of the Irish Sea pushing in with the tide. You arrive at the dock before sunrise. The cobblestones are still wet from the night's rain, and your boot slides on a patch of seaweed carried up by the last flood. Around you, the dock is already alive. Men in heavy wool jackets carry crates down a gangway, their breath white in the August cold of early morning. A woman holds a bundle wrapped in oilcloth pressed against her chest with both arms, her eyes moving across the ship's hull above her. The SS Great Britain sits in the water like a building that has decided to float, her iron hull black and massive, her single funnel already beginning to breathe a thin thread of smoke into the grey sky. 6 masts rise above her deck. Between them, the rigging hangs in dense, dark webs. You crane your neck upward, and for a moment you cannot find the top. A boatswain shouts something from the upper deck, and 3 men below him break into a run across the dock. A cart horse drags a load of coal sacks toward the bunker hatch, shoes clanging on the iron rails laid into the dock surface, and the coal dust rises in a thin black cloud that settles on everything. On your collar, on the woman's oilcloth bundle, on the surface of the water between the hull and the dock wall. You are about to spend the next 60 days on this ship. The gangway trembles under your feet as you climb. You reach the main deck and stop. The ship stretches before you, longer than any building on the street where you grew up. Men are everywhere, coiling ropes, checking rigging, hammering something below a hatch cover, moving in a choreography that looks chaotic until you realize every single action has a purpose and a sequence and a man responsible for it. You grip the rail. Liverpool is still visible behind you. The warehouses, the clock tower, the cranes, the forest of other masts. A bell rings once from somewhere in the ship's interior. The deck vibrates beneath your feet. The engines have woken up. Gold was found in Victoria in 1851, and the news arrived in England the way a stone thrown into a still pond arrives. One ripple, then another, then the whole surface disturbed. A young man in Manchester reads the newspaper at a kitchen table, his tea going cold beside his hand. The page folded back to the column that says alluvial gold and rich deposits and free land. He does not look up for a long time. His wife stands in the doorway holding a dish she has forgotten to dry. In the dockyards of Liverpool and Bristol and London, shipping agents print notices and paste them to walls beside bakeries and ironmongers. Melbourne, steerage passage, immediate departure. A crowd forms in front of the notice before the paste has dried. Men in worn caps read with their lips moving. A woman lifts a child to see over the heads in front of her. By 1852, the word Australia has changed meaning. It is no longer a place where England sends its criminals. It is a place where the poor go to stop being poor. This changes everything about who boards the SS Great Britain and why. The ship herself is a product of the same ambition that drove the men reading those notices. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, a small man with a permanent cigar and boots that added 2 inches to his height, designed her from keel to masthead as proof that iron could float and engines could replace wind. He stands at a drafting table in his Bristol office, his hand moving across a sheet of paper, the lines becoming a hull that no one had built before. Other engineers told him iron would sink. He built it anyway. He drew the screw propeller that drives her through the water instead of the paddle wheels every other steamship uses. And he drew it knowing that the mathematics were right and the doubters were wrong, and he was correct on both counts. The screw churns below the waterline now, invisible, pulling the ship forward with a low, continuous vibration that you feel in the soles of your boots and in your back teeth. It does not stop. For 60 days, it will not stop. Coal powers everything aboard. Men called trimmers work in the bunkers below the waterline, shoveling coal from the storage space toward the furnace mouths, their bodies bent double in the low tunnels, their faces black from eyebrow to collarbone. A stoker opens a furnace door and the orange light floods his face, and the heat presses against his chest like a hand. He feeds another shovelful in. The door swings shut. He turns and picks up the shovel again. This will be his day. Every day. Until Melbourne. The ship carries roughly 600 souls on this voyage, and the distance between the best cabin and the worst berth is not measured in meters, it is measured in entire worlds. Walk forward from the stern, and you pass through all of them. In the first-class saloon, a table is set with white linen and silver cutlery, and a merchant from Birmingham, named Mr. Calder, sits with his wife, who wears a dress the colour of deep water, her hair pinned with a tortoiseshell comb. He has paid the full fare, 65 guineas, because the gold fields of Victoria have made men like him rich already, and now he needs to see his assets in person. His wife holds a small book in her lap, but is not reading. She watches the porthole. The sea outside is nothing like the paintings in their drawing room at home. He cuts a piece of beef and chews it slowly. Go forward, past the second-class cabins, past the narrow corridor where a family of 4 shares a space not much larger than a wardrobe, the father's hat hanging from a nail above the bunk where 2 children sleep pressed together. Go forward still, and down the companion ladder into steerage, where the air is thick and the light comes from oil lanterns swinging on hooks, and the ceiling is close enough to touch without raising your arm above your shoulder. Margaret O'Brien from County Cork sits on the edge of a wooden bunk with her youngest child across her knees, the child asleep, its mouth slightly open. Margaret has been on this ship for 4 hours, and she has already prayed twice. She left Ireland because the land gave nothing, and the landlord took what remained. She is not going to the gold fields. She is going to her brother in Melbourne, who has a room and a job and a door that locks from the inside, which is more than she has had in 3 years. She shifts the child and runs her thumb along its cheekbone. The lantern swings. The hull groans. The screw turns. Above on the open deck, a young Scottish engineer named Thomas Gillies leans on the forward rail and watches Liverpool disappear. He is 24 years old, apprenticed to a firm that builds bridges, and he has a notebook in his coat pocket that he will fill with observations before they reach the equator. He sketches the funnel from below, trying to catch the angle of the smoke in the wind. A sailor passes behind him, carrying a coil of rope over one shoulder, barefoot on the iron deck, toes gripping the surface with the ease of someone who has never known anything else. At the waterline, inside the ship, 2 Irish labourers named Declan and Seamus work alongside the trimmers in the coal bunker. They boarded not as paying passengers, but as working passage, coal and sweat in exchange for the ticket. Declan's hands are already bleeding where the shovel handle has opened a blister that formed this morning and split by midday. He does not stop shoveling. Seamus sings something low and rhythmic in Irish, more breath than melody, and the sound moves through the coal dust and the darkness and the heat. By the 3rd day out of Liverpool, the Irish Sea has made its opinion known, and the ship rolls, not the gentle tilting that passengers imagined when they read about sea voyages, but a long, deep, sideways lurch that sends everything on every table sliding toward the same edge at once. A tin cup bounces off the floor of the steerage deck and rolls the length of the compartment. 3 people are sick before breakfast. By evening, it is not 3. A woman holds the rail on the open deck, her face the color of the sea in November, her knuckles white around the iron. The wind takes her hair loose from its pins, and it flies horizontal. She does not let go of the rail. Below her, through the iron deck plates, she can feel the engine, that constant, indifferent vibration. And it helps slightly to have something that does not move. Your own berth is narrow enough that you can touch both walls with your elbows. That the mattress is straw inside a canvas cover, and by the second morning the straw has shifted, and you can feel the board beneath. The smell in steerage changes within 48 hours of leaving port. Wet wool, unwashed bodies, coal smoke filtering down from above, and underneath all of it, a sweetish, sourish undercurrent that you stop noticing after a week because you have become part of it. There is 1 washroom for every 60 people in your section, and the queue begins before first light. The water that comes from the tap is cold. There is no other temperature. You wash your face and neck and hands and count it enough. Teeth are the quiet epidemic aboard emigrant ships, and this one is no exception. A man in the berth across from yours has been holding his jaw since the 2nd evening out of Liverpool. There is nothing to be done. Watch, the ship carries a surgeon, a Dr. Henderson, a thin Scotsman who moves through the ship with a black bag and an expression of resigned competence. But for a bad tooth in 1852, the only treatment is extraction. And extraction means a chair and a pair of pliers, and no preparation beyond a small glass of brandy if you are lucky. The man holds his jaw. His wife puts her hand over his. The ship moves south. Stand at the stern at midnight and look back at the wake. The propeller churns the black water into white, and the white spreads and flattens and disappears into the dark. And there is nothing behind you. No Liverpool, no land, no other ships. The stars above the South Atlantic are different from the stars above England, and it takes several nights to understand why. There are more of them, and they are brighter. And the Milky Way is not a suggestion, but a structure, a white road running from one horizon to the other. A sailor on watch stands at the rail 10 meters from you, his silhouette still against all that movement. He does not speak. He is watching a point of light that may be a star or maybe a ship, and he will not look away until he knows which. The ship has its own geography. The first-class passengers live in the stern, closest to the rudder, furthest from the engine noise. The steerage passengers live in the bow, closest to the water rushing past the hull, furthest from the private spaces of the wealthy. Between these two worlds is the machinery of the ship, the engine room, the coal bunkers, the galley, the water tanks, the cargo hold where 500 boxes and trunks and crates sit in organized dark, carrying the entire material content of 600 lives. A ship's cook named Williams stands at a range in the galley at 5 in the morning, peeling potatoes into a bucket, his face lit by the range fire, the movement of the ship pushing him slightly left and slightly right, in a rhythm he has long since stopped correcting for. A cat, grey, one-eared, sits on a barrel nearby and watches with total indifference. Watch now as the AI Reconstruction draws back. The ink lines of an 1852 Admiralty chart lift from the page and become a sea surface, and the sea surface fills with weather, and in the weather a black iron ship moves south-southwest, smoke trailing from her funnel, sails set on 4 masts to use the trade winds, the screw still turning, the hull leaving its white scar across the water. She passes the Canary Islands without stopping. She crosses the equator in heat that makes the iron deck too hot to touch. She rounds the Cape of Good Hope in weather that no first-class passenger's writing describes fully, because the words available in 1852 are not adequate to 40-foot swells and a wind that makes standing upright a continuous act of physical effort.
Keep a steady course.
The SS Great Britain runs on coal and on labour, and on a chain of authority as rigid as the hull itself. The captain, a man named Matthews, square-faced, bearded, who has been at sea since the age of 14, stands on the bridge in the morning light and reads the barometer with the expression of someone reading a letter from a difficult relative. His officers stand behind him. One writes in a logbook, one holds a sextant. Below the bridge, the first mate walks the main deck, and his word is immediate law for the seamen. Men who climb rigging in weather that would empty the streets of any city, whose hands are scarred and whose eyes are always slightly narrowed, even in calm conditions, as if they are permanently expecting the next difficulty. Below the waterline, in the engine room, the chief engineer, a man named Crawford, who carries a small oil can in his coat pocket the way other men carry a watch, makes his rounds every 4 hours. He moves between the two great steam cylinders, checking valves, testing temperatures with the back of his hand, listening with his ear against the metal casing for any sound that is not the correct sound. The engines are the most complex moving objects most people aboard have ever seen, and Crawford knows every bolt. Then a pressure gauge on the port cylinder ticks slightly into the warning zone, and Crawford adjusts a valve with 3 turns of a wrench and watches the needle move back. He replaces the wrench in his jacket. He moves on. The ship carries a post office, a locked room where a postal clerk named Finch sorts letters and packages into wooden pigeonholes, the ship's motion sending occasional envelopes sliding to the floor. He picks them up without breaking his sorting rhythm. These letters are going to people who have not received word from England in months, in some cases, years. A man in Melbourne will open a letter from his mother in 6 weeks' time and sit down on the step of his Goldfield hut and read it twice without moving. Aboard the ship, the social engine also runs on its own fuel. A clergyman named Reverend Morse holds Sunday service on the main deck. Passengers seated on whatever they have carried up from below. Crates, rope coils, folded coats. The hymn they sing rises above the funnel smoke, and the wind takes it apart before it reaches the second verse. Morse holds his Bible open with both hands, the pages pressing against the wind. Around him, first-class passengers sit in chairs carried up by stewards. Behind them, steerage passengers stand in a mass. The gap between the two groups is a metre of open deck that no one crosses. Margaret O'Brien has not slept in 2 nights, not because of the motion. She has grown used to the role, but because the child beside her has a fever that arrived on the 4th day out of Liverpool and has not left. She sits on the edge of the bunk with a damp cloth in her hand, pressing it to the child's forehead, then wringing it into the bucket at her feet, then pressing it again. The lantern above her swings in slow arcs. Dr. Henderson came this morning, crouched in the low space beside the bunk, pressed 2 fingers to the child's wrist, looked at the tongue, said, "Keep her cool and keep her drinking," and moved on to the next case. Margaret dips the cloth, wrings it, presses it. The hull breathes around her. She carries in her coat pocket a folded letter from her brother in Melbourne, stained from being read so many times that the creases are soft as cloth. She does not take it out now. She knows what it says. She holds it through the fabric of her pocket with her free hand, while the other works the cloth, and she watches her daughter's chest rise and fall, rise and fall. Us and the engine turns beneath them both, indifferent and steady, and taking them south. By the time the ship crosses the equator, the child's fever has broken. Margaret carries her up to the open deck in the early morning, both of them blinking in the equatorial light.
I've never seen a sea
The
like
sea
this before.
a colour
It's
blue
magnificent.
that neither of them has ever seen. The child puts her hand out over the rail and opens her fingers in the wind. Week 7. The Southern Ocean. The barometer on the bridge drops in the night without stopping, and Captain Matthews is on the bridge before dawn, his coat over his nightshirt, watching the horizon with both hands on the rail. The sky to the southwest is the colour of iron. The wind arrives before the cloud does, a sound like the ship being struck along its full length. The rigging screaming in a register that makes passengers in their berths sit upright in the dark. Then the sea comes up. But then, the wave that no one saw coming hits the port bow, and the ship lurches starboard with a violence that sends everything horizontal. A woman is thrown from her bunk onto the deck. A trunk slides across steerage and strikes the opposite wall with a sound like a cannon. A stoker in the engine room loses his grip on a ladder rung. and falls 2 meters onto the iron grating below, lying still for a moment before the man beside him pulls him upright. Water pours through a poorly sealed hatch cover and runs down the companion ladder in a black sheet. Children are crying in 3 separate compartments, and the cries mix with the wind and the groaning of the hull and the continuous, I'm unchanging turn of the screw beneath everything. On the bridge, Matthews gives the order to take in sail. Seamen go up the rigging in a wind that makes standing on deck impossible without holding something. They climb into it hand over hand, their bodies nearly horizontal in the gusts, and furl the canvas with fingers they cannot feel. One man loses his footing on the yard and hangs by his arms for 4 seconds before he gets his feet back on the rope below. He does not come down. He finishes the job. The storm lasts 31 hours. When it passes, the sky behind it is washed clean and the sea is still heaving in long, exhausted swells. A sailor finds a seabird sitting on the bowsprit. A single albatross, enormous, white and grey, its wings folded, resting. It sits there for an hour. No one disturbs it. In the days after the storm, the ship repairs itself, and so do its people. A carpenter moves through steerage with a bucket of oakum and a mallet, resealing a seam where water came through. 2 women have organised a system for drying children's clothes near the engine room ventilation shafts, hanging small garments on a rope strung between pipes, the warm air from below rising through and drying them in an hour. Thomas Gillies, the young Scottish engineer, sits on a coil of rope on the forward deck with his notebook open, drawing a cross-section of the ship's hull from memory, trying to understand how iron behaves differently from wood in a following sea. His pencil moves fast. He will use these notes in a paper he presents to the Institution of Civil Engineers in Edinburgh 4 years from now. Margaret O'Brien stands at the stern rail in the evening light, her daughter beside her, the child's hand in hers. The wake behind the ship is white and straight and stretches back toward a horizon that now holds nothing. No storm, no England, no past. The Southern Ocean glitters in the late sun. A flying fish breaks the surface 10 meters from the hull and arcs through the air and re-enters the water without a splash. On the 63rd day, the coast of Victoria appears on the horizon as a dark line that thickens slowly into cliffs and then into hills covered in a low, grey-green scrub, unlike any vegetation the English and Irish passengers have seen before. People crowd the rail. A man lifts a child onto his shoulders. Someone begins to cry and does not try to stop. The pilot boat comes out from Port Phillip Heads, and the pilot climbs the rope ladder thrown down from the ship's side. And the SS Great Britain follows him in through the heads and into the calmer water of the bay. And Melbourne reveals itself slowly around a bend. A city of tents and timber buildings, and brick warehouses and muddy streets that end at a beach where small boats are pulled up on the shore. It is nothing like Liverpool. It is nothing like anywhere. It is exactly where 600 people need to be. The SS Great Britain makes this run again the following year and the year after that. She carries gold seekers and families and letters and grief and ambition and the particular kind of hope that only people with nothing left to lose can carry. A hope with no margin for error, no backup plan, no return ticket. She keeps sailing until 1886, when she is finally retired to the Falkland Islands and beached, used as a storage hulk, and left to rust for nearly a century. In 1970, a salvage team floats her free from the Falkland mud and tows her back to Bristol, back to the dry dock where she was built, where she still sits today under a glass enclosure that holds a controlled atmosphere around her hull. You can walk beneath her now, beneath that iron keel, and press your hand against the metal and feel nothing except cool and solid and still. But in 1852, she is moving. She is always moving. Her screw turns beneath the Southern Ocean, and her hull cuts through water that no iron ship had crossed before. And inside, her 600 people are becoming something they were not when they boarded. Not yet Australians, not quite English anymore. And suspended between one world and another in 63 days of coal smoke and salt water, and the sound of the engine that never stopped. Where the coffee shops and pedestrian walkways of Williamstown stand today, there was once a muddy shore where small boats rowed out to meet a black iron ship appearing on the horizon. The men on those boats shielded their eyes against the light. The ship came on. Every city you have ever loved was built by people crossing water with less than they needed and more courage than they knew they had. The engine stopped at last in Melbourne Harbour, but 63 days of turning had already changed the shape of the world.